Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. Today we are going to talk about how to complete a Delphi migration effortlessly. For quality purposes, everyone else is muted except for me, but if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A panel on the right. My name is Alex Ruiz and I'm a consultant for Latin America. This below is my email. So today we're going to talk about how to lead a successful migration. Have in mind that no two migrations are the same. No two projects are the same. We have done migrations for projects that have, I don't know, thousands and thousands of lines of code, hundreds of forms. These are my personal recommendations on how to do a migration. The main points to consider when doing a migration are, for example, the Unicode Compatibility, 64-bit migration, database and middleware migration, and any third-party components that you might have in your application. And we'll also talk about some tips that have worked for me on doing migrations. Mostly these are based on my personal experience. Okay, so first, the things to consider when migrating applications. The main ones are, like I mentioned before, Unicode compatibility, the architecture migration, any database and middleware migration, and components that are third-party for which we may or may not have source code. Okay, so let's get started with the Unicode compatibility. First of all, Unicode is the name of an international character set. It contains all of the symbols written for written alphabets in the world, including the current ones and alphabets used in the past. It also contains technical symbols, punctuations, and any other character used when writing text, even if it's not part of an alphabet. Now, the benefits to developers on this new feature introduced in 2009 is that it will allow us to create applications that out of the box support input in any other language other than the one that we're currently using. So in case of the United States, if it's English, or South America, or any Western country, this was simply this was as easy as just changing a character set and encoding, but now we can support other languages. This opens the door to other markets, and if you're using a character set or an alphabet outside of these ones that I have mentioned, it would also be very easy for you to create applications that support English. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about exactly what the changes are. I'll show you a lot of content and documents where you can find much detailed information about exactly what the changes are. But basically what happened in 2009, prior to 2009, string, characters, and chars and p-chars were stored in data structures where each character was represented by 1 byte. So this meant that we were limited to 256 characters for our alphabets. Now, there were already a lot of techniques to allow us to store different alphabets, like character sets and encodings. But the change to Unicode allows us to store in and represent in one single application multiple alphabets. Now, starting in 2009, in the version released in 2009, strings, chars, and p-chars in Delphi no longer point to this single byte structure. Now they point to a multi-byte structure that is going to allow us to to show these representations of additional character sets, encodings, alphabets in a single application. These changes also change the size of a string. The size of a string in bytes before was equal to its length. Now, this is no longer the case, and because we are going to have a multi-byte character set, so this means that the size will no longer match the length. These changes were done by pointing for example, a string is now pointing a Unicode string type, which is a UTF-16 string. A char is now pointed to a Y char, which is a 2-byte character type, and a P char now points to a PY char, which is just a pointer to a 2-byte char. If you like more information, please go to the Migration and Upgrade Center at Embarcadero. Here we have a lot more information. We have great resources for you to look at more details. For example, the Delphi and Unicode white paper by Mark Cantu, and the Delphi Unicode Migration for Mere Mortals by Carrie Jensen. You can also find right here a link to our Unicode's statistics tool. This will assist you in collecting statistics on what to expect when migrating your application. Do not worry, do not panic if you see that there are many strings in your application. In a lot of cases, these strings you don't have to worry about them. Let me switch really quick to a virtual machine that I have with Delphi 7 running. In this machine, I have loaded one of the demos. It's called the REST Explorer demo. It was included in Delphi 7. I have it already loaded in my IDE, and let's just make sure that it compiles and runs. Yes, it does. Okay, so I'm going to copy this folder and place it in my computer right here. Okay, so let's now load that into our IDE. Great, so it loads. And just to show you the type of issues that you would see when migrating an application from one of these older versions like Delphi 5, 6, or 7 that are very common amongst our users. I am getting an incompatible type error. It says PNC char is not compatible with my PY char. Now remember what I told you. PY char is actually, the P char is actually pointing to PY char. Let's see what this function is actually requiring. Notice that it requires a PNC char. So this is a simple fix. Of course, we then need to test if the results are what we intended. But you can notice that right here, it was quite simple. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation. And let's talk about migrating to 32-bit applications. This was done in Delphi XE2, and the functionality was to add the ability to create with the same code base and without that many changes. As before, I would like to recommend that you find more information at the Migration and Upgrade Center. Here you can see more information about the migration from 32 to 64-bit applications. I would really recommend you going into the doc wiki if you want to find out more. Some of the benefits that you're going to get from this migration is mostly on speed. There are different types of variables that will be used that will improve performance. Mostly the data types that have to do with double and single types, as well as the applications that are 32 bits will no longer have to be virtualized by the operating system on real time. For example, I don't know if you have noticed, but whenever you have a 32-bit application and it tries to write to certain sections of the registry, it does this in a virtualized manner. And same thing with the file system. That's the reason why you have the program files x86. This is virtualized in real time so the operating system can keep these applications from mixing with the actual applications that match the architecture. All right, so as I said, you can find a lot more information here. Similar to strings, some data types now change in size, so you can no longer count on, for example, size of a pointer being 4. These are now larger data types. In the case of integers, same thing. This actually changes. For example, when you have calls to the API, you in previous versions you had to do some casting. Now here's additional information on how to actually do these calls. Very well. Let's continue with our presentation and talk about database and middleware changes from version to version. It's very likely that if you are in an older version of Delphi, for example, Delphi 6 or 7, which is a very common version amongst our users, it's likely that you are using BDE to connect to your database. BDE has now been deprecated, and starting in XE8, it was removed from the Delphi installation. You can still download it directly from Code Central and install it in any of the recent versions of Delphi. But I would like to recommend you to take a look at FireDAC. FireDAC is our latest database engine, and if you're coming from BDE, you're gonna feel right at home. It's very simple to use. It's what you would expect as far as a successor to BDE. Let me just show you very quick how easy it is to create an application that connects to a database. Again, it's quite similar to what you are used to. let me go to the Data Explorer and simply grab one of my local tables that I have here for SQLite. And I'm going to place it here. Notice that this creates a connection. Connection deployment in BD and in FireDAC compared to BDE, it's much simpler. You have all of the connection string, all of the information right here. And this is actually a query, so you have the query right here with your data. You can look at the fields the way you could in BDE, and you know, it uses pretty much the same component set that what you are actually used to if you're coming from BDE. It uses the DataWare component, so you're gonna feel right at home doing that. Now, what if you have an application that uses BDE? Well, there are tools that will help you migrate from BDE to FireDAC. An in-house tool, Refined, will allow you to convert this automatically from BDE to FireDAC. I'm not going to do a live migration, but I would like to show you one of these scripts. Let me do Refined, so you can get an idea on how this actually looks. All right, so Refined is a tool that it's distributed with Delphi. It's installed right in the binary folder, and it can run against a given project and do a replacement of the components and code that you actually have in that particular project. It is based on scripts again, so it does a smart replacement. It's not just a blind replacement. And I like to look at these script files from the bottom up. So let's first take a look at what it's actually going to replace to do the smart replacement. It does, I'm actually going to remove the word wrap. Let's go back down. Okay, so here you have some, like a set of commands that will actually tell Refined the executable what to change and what to change it to. So in the case of a T-table, for example, it's going to change it to an FD table, and it's going to add all of these units to the uses clause. So it minimizes the work that you have to do. Now, based on experience, again, Refined is not going to do 100% of the job, but it does about a 90% of the replacements that you're going to need. It does, for example, things like change types, sets, and other things. It's going to remove components that are no longer needed. It's going to remove from the uses the units that are obsolete or that you no longer need. But as you can see, I mean, it's very thorough in what it does. If you're interested in our YouTube channel, you can find examples of the use of Refined and the Delphi parser, an alternative to Refined. So you can take a look at how these tools work and what they do for you. Very good. So finally, in our main points of migration, let's talk about third-party components. Now, third-party components, third-party libraries were very common in the good old Delphi 6 or 7 days, and you could find a lot of component providers, a lot of even open source code for these types of components. Good news is that if you have the source code, you can rebuild them with the current Delphi version. Having the source code makes this an easy process, and you basically have to follow what we talked about already. You have to do the Unicode preparation. You have to make sure that the application, in this case the package or the library for third-party components, is going to build, and you just need to rebuild it. Now, in some cases, depending on the type of the component, you might encounter that the Unicode changes are complex. For example, if you have a library that does encryption, that does compression or things like that, you're going to find that since in the old Delphi 6 and 7 days, that since byte arrays were compatible with strings, or actually the other way around, strings were just byte arrays. In many cases, developers used strings to exchange data, to put them into files and stuff like that. So now that is not as easy. So you are going to have to do several changes in the code. To instead of using strings, you need to replace that to ANSI strings. But again, for example, the Unicode statistics tool is going to help you find these possible issues in these applications. In the case of third-party components without the source code, they just have to be moved to the current Delphi version. What we have found, and this is actually really good news, is that with our package manager, get it, a lot of component creators are coming back and into our package manager and uploading their components. In the case of open source components, in many cases we do this work. So again, let me go once more to the IDE and show you the package manager. In this case, we have many libraries right here from third-party components creators, where you can actually find excellent libraries and component sets for use in your application. In a lot of cases, if the component set or the library is not here, you can easily find it available. Major or the biggest component creators, we have seen that they have versions available for the latest components. So again, this is good news because you can migrate your applications without being held up by a component set that is not available. Once again, this information, you can find additional information in the Migration and Upgrade Center from Embarcadero. So if you have, or if you want to find any additional information, you may be able to find it there. Very good. So now let's look at the following section in our presentation. Let's talk about recommendations for a successful migration. Again, I would like to let you know that these are personal recommendations from experience doing a lot of migrations in the US and in Latin America. Again, what we have seen is that we have a lot of customers that are in Delphi 7, one of the great versions of Delphi, and one of the reasons why they stay in these older versions. It's due to the quality of the applications that you can create in Delphi 7. Delphi applications are first-class citizen in Windows. We connect to the Windows API. I mean, the applications that we create are native, and that's one of the reasons why Delphi applications have such a long life. Even the IDE, for example, the Delphi 7 IDE ran for a good 12 to 14 years without any issues. Once the newer versions of the operating system of Windows came out, well, it became increasingly more difficult to run the IDE. But the applications created in Delphi and even in these versions continue to run, and they will probably continue to run for a long time. Now, the way I have done these migrations, the first thing I do actually before doing the migration is set my objectives. Answering why do we want to migrate, and what do we want to migrate to. Now, these, in my opinion, they're really easy to answer. In the case of why do you want to migrate, there are great new features, especially from a version as old as Delphi 7 that came out about 16 years ago. So the feature set that has been added to Delphi is great. I mean, there are many new features, including something added in the latest version. The multi-platform support is that one by itself could be one of the major reasons to migrate. What do we want to migrate? Again, this is, in my opinion, easy to answer. Usually it should be the latest version. But in this case, the answer to this question is more, what is it? What platform? What technology is it that we want to migrate? We have support for cloud technology without actually being cloud specific. So you can use AWS, Azure, or any other cloud provider available. Same thing with the platform. You can migrate your legacy code from Delphi in any of its older versions, and move that code, that business logic, that investment that you currently have into a cloud or a mobile-based application. Another thing that we have to consider before migrating is, again, as we talked before, third-party components. We check the availability of the third-party components that we have in our application, and if not available or not practical actually to migrate to those, we can look for alternatives. There are many alternatives in Get. The same thing as with any other code repository like GitHub or similar. So again, there are many components out there that you can leverage and use in your applications. In my experience, one thing that I have done in the past when replacing third-party components, or even actually evaluating the third-party components available on the latest version, is actually use their evaluation periods. Um, Most component creators give you about a month to evaluate their components, and this is more than enough to see if you're going to need the actual components, or if you are going to replace them with any others. Again, continuing with the things that you do before migrating, um, I would really recommend to doing a code cleanup, um, making sure that you get rid of any unneeded dependencies. Sometimes, what I have seen personally here is that um, there are or there were uh, third-party components or libraries that we were using that are no longer required. So here is important to make sure that that all of the dependencies that we have in our projects are actually required. You can actually take a look at if all of the units in your uses clause are needed. There are tools that allow you to do this. Um, in case you find any discontinued third-party components, well, in this case, you're stuck with actually having to remove them and replace them with something newer. Um, and this is a personal favorite. I really like doing this one because it, once you're done, you end up with source only. So removing binary and obsolete files in your code directories, it's it's just a really good practice. Now, going back to our folder, actually, for the project that we moved from Delphi 7, notice that DCUs and executables and other files um, stay with the source code. This was a very common practice in the old days. Now, when we create a project, and let's go back to the IDE and save one of the projects that we had created. If I were to save this project, let me save everything in the folder that we had. Okay, let's create a new folder. Let's call it demo. And project demo. Oh, sorry, this is the units. So let's just keep the unit 2 name. Project, same thing, project 4. And let's take a look at our folder. Okay, notice that right here we have simply the source code, and in my opinion, it should stay that way. We also have some hidden folders. Right now I have showing these folders, but notice if I compile and build this project, let's see what's going to happen. What's actually going to happen is that any binary and object file created by the compilation and build process goes into its own folder. If I add a new platform, which I forgot actually to show how easy it is to add for example, a 64-bit platform. Let's see, we have 2, and we actually build this. Notice that again our structure it's going to add this, but our code is going to remain clean. In other words, this is a process that we should do with our legacy projects and migrated projects. That is quite important. And now, why actually having to do this is important in my opinion, is so you can use source control repository. It's Delphi out of the box allows you to do several source control options. You can do Git out of the box, Mercurial, Subversion, but even though it is not completely or fully integrated into the IDE, you can use other types of source control, including TFS, VSTS, or Azure DevOps. The integration, again, is not an integration in the IDE, but it's quite easy to use. Now, why using a source control repository is important? In my opinion, it allows you to maintain a history of the project the way it was when you had it in an older version of Delphi. And in many cases, it's going to help you, track or trace bugs introduced by these changes in the migration. Okay, so once your code is clean, is safe in source control, and you don't have any dependencies, it's build time. Again, it's important to verify your project options to make sure that, for example, your folders and output folders, output for binaries and stuff like that are properly configured. Make sure you understand this. The bold elements here are common for your project, and you can customize the actual branches here, the leaves of your configuration. So yeah, again, make sure you understand this, and it will help you create project options that are easy to maintain. Again, you can take a look at this information, the options that you can select. For example, if you are doing debug, make sure that the debug symbols are enabled and stuff like that. So once you bring your project over from Delphi 7 to the latest version, a lot of this is going to be done for you. But in many cases, you might end up with options that are not actually available or that don't make sense. So make sure you clean this up. It's a really good practice. Okay, so let's go back to our presentation. One thing that I have seen also causing issues amongst developer is the compiler version directives, and this is mostly the case whenever you have source code for third-party components. Since third-party components usually build their code for multiple versions, it's very common to have the ink files. So let's see if we can find a couple of ink files here in my machine to show you what I mean. Okay, so let's do star.ink, and let's try to find, this is a really good one. And here you can see just the different compiler versions and the different versions of the VCL. And again, this is quite a common view of an ink file. Notice here that there is going to be the list of the versions supported or the behavior of the compiler that you actually want. In many cases, they are going to default to the oldest version of the compiler or the VCL. So it is important to make sure that you add the version that you have into the file of your third-party component. Okay, going back to our presentation. After we check project options and compiler version directives, we're going to need to solve code dependencies for third-party components. We have been talking a lot about this, so make sure that once you actually migrate and you're building a latest version, in this case the latest version is Rio, that you have all of your third-party components via source, via evaluation, or you purchase the latest version. Then you're going to need to solve your own problems or the problems with your own code. Again, talking about the Unicode issues that you might have, 64-bit compilation. So here is where you apply what we talked about earlier. Again, the Migration and Upgrade Center from Embarcadero is a really great resource. And finally, just make sure that you resolve all of the hints and warnings that you might get. Hints and warnings are there for a reason, so don't ignore them. Pay attention to them and make sure that you clean them up. In most cases, they're quite easy to solve, and they just might bring issues in the future if you don't. Once your application is actually compiled, built, and running, there's your chance to actually do some stabilization, do functionality tests, make sure you correct any issues, bugs, errors that you find, and run acceptance test at this point. So in theory, what you're going to have in this at this moment is your code in the older version of Delphi running, and in that machine you're probably going to have it running, and you're going to have the binary created by the older version of Delphi and the binary created by the newest version of Delphi. So it's a time to compare, make sure that the functionality is still the same. And again, like in the case of the little example that we did, make sure that the changes that we're actually doing is what we intend. So this is where you make sure that the application is behaving the way it should. Now, one thing that I haven't mentioned is that the longer you wait to do the migration and the upgrade of a version, the harder it gets. I mean, there's no way around that. If you're migrating 1, 2, 3, 4 versions, and there is no big change in between them, like for example the Unicode change, the XE change, or you're not changing a platform or something like that, it's quite easy to migrate. Migrating from Seattle, Tokyo to Rio, Berlin, any of those versions is quite easy. I mean, in most cases, you're going to open the application in the latest version, having the third-party components required, and the application is going to run. And if you don't use third-party components, we need to worry about anything else. You pretty much just compile. In very large applications, sometimes the compiler behaves a little bit different, so you might see a couple of changes here and there, but 9 out of 10 applications that you compile are going to be quite simple to to do this migration. Once you test and the application is running and you can actually deploy this application to customers' machines, you can think of other things. For example, modernization of your application. Modernizing your app is very simple. If, for example, you use styles, this is almost like a freebie. I mean, again, I'm going to go back to the IDE and let's come in here and let's open the application that we brought from Delphi 7. This application is quite old. It's we can actually check when was the application first created. 2002, so 16 years ago. And you know, by changing, for example, enabling themes, enabling DPI, you can bring this application, you know, give it a new life. In this case, the application is already very well aligned, and it uses panels, as you can see, but you know, the application could still get some quick changes. You can do, for example, add appearance here, one of the themes. Let's, for example, add this one for Windows 10. Again, one more thing is to make sure that we add where is it? Here it is. We can add the DPI awareness. This is actually quite a recent feature, the DPI awareness per monitor. You enable runtime themes, and by doing these minor changes, you can breathe new life into your applications. So sorry, I didn't actually save the changes, so let's do them again, and let's make sure that the application runs. And notice that the app is now actually themed for Windows 10. If I were to pick one of the Metro themes, darker or something like that, it would take any of those changes. So again, there are many changes that you can do in addition to this. For example, you can use the new panels, like the card panel, stackable panel, relative panel, grid and flow panels, to make your application responsive. These use a very similar model to, for example, something like Bootstrap in the web, that will allow you to have something like columns. Actually, maybe not Bootstrap, but like Flexbox, that it allows you to resize or reposition applications based on the form factor. So you can actually do this in Delphi. Alignments, anchors, margin. You have been able to do that for quite many years, but the new panels allow you to go even further. Now, what else can you do on your application? Of course, you can do the change to 64 bits. Of course, you can change the database connection. Notice that this is done at the very end. This is again a recommendation based on my experience and what I think is a good way to migrate. In my opinion, it's important to make sure that the application runs before we do infrastructure changes. If we go too far too soon and go ahead and change the database engine to that we use to connect to our databases, you might find that you know, there are errors early in the process that you're not sure if it's because of the version of Delphi, because of the third-party components, because of the compiler or the options or something like that. Since BDE is still available in the latest version, I recommend that you download it, you compile your application, and then you do the FireDAC migration. Once you migrate to FireDAC, the application is going to be much faster. It's going to be much more responsive. It's going to look great. So that gives your application a much longer life. I mean, if your application came from, for example, Delphi 6, that was released about 17 or almost 18 years ago, well, you know for sure that your application is going to run for the near and mid future. So again, this is just my personal recommendation, but it has been successful in the migrations that I have done. What else can you do? Well, now that your application looks great and runs faster with the latest and greatest database engine, you can think of migrating this from for example, if it's a database application, from a client-server application to a multi-layer application, separating the business logic out, using RAD server to publish the REST endpoints for the business logic. You can push this RAD server API to be consumed by a mobile device by using FireMonkey and doing a multi-platform application, or you could actually push this into the web and create a Sencha web application, Sencha XJS or Sencha any of the other flavors, and actually publish the information. So you can actually do a multi-layered application with multi-platforms, and once you actually do this migration from your current architecture to a multiple layer. Again, this is something that I have done in the past with large projects, and it's a successful strategy. And well, if you would like any additional information, I have some links here of the information that we have seen. A great resource that I have been mentioning during this presentation is the Migration and Upgrade Center at Embarcadero. And let's open the webinar for questions.
Hello everyone. So we're going to go through some of the questions that we got in the webinar.
There's a few questions here about learning Delphi. There's a few links to good books. Nick Hodges, Marco Cantu both have some self-published books. Packet Publishing has a number of Delphi books available on their website as well. Recommend you take a look at those. And Carrie Jensen has a FireDAC in-depth book, which I also recommend. Really good stuff there. So take a look at those resources, and you probably can find recent updated books on learning Delphi.
Yeah, one more thing would be the Delphi Academy.
Oh yeah, Embarcadero Academy, yes.
Of course, yeah, that one. Here in our region, we call it the Delphi Academy. So yeah, I'm sorry, the Embarcadero Academy, a great resource for people that are interested in getting started on Delphi.
Apparently, Packet has all of their Delphi books on sale for $5 a piece right now.
Wow.
I just clicked to their website to look and see, and it's like $5. I'm like, oh my goodness, I should go. I have most of these already, but
yeah. Hey, someone commented that there was a bit of an issue on audio going up and down. Yes, I did realize that once was here. I apologize for that. I'll make sure to do audio leveling next time I do one of these.
So there's a comment here that Ray's components is not available in Get It. I just looked the day and I thought it was there. So let me check right now. It's called KVCL, which I did not see right away because I was expecting you to name something else. So maybe we need to change the name.
Right.
But let me see if it's still there. And also a comment that you have to have the administrator privileges to install stuff from Get It. That I found that depends on the what's being installed. Some of the installers are running the third-party installers externally, which does require the administrator privileges. But if it is, like for example, the Turbo Pack, then those do not require it. Okay, I don't see it. Let me keep looking here. Turbo Pack should not require that. So it depends on the installer you're running as to what is required. Okay, I will dig into this because I don't see it right now. And I thought for sure I just checked the other day and it was here.
Okay.
So there's a comment here about the performance of the IDE between Delphi 7 and Rio. I found that Rio and Tokyo and some of the recent IDEs are way more stable than some of the ones that have been, and more performant than some of the ones between Delphi 7 and Rio. What's been your experience on that, Alex?
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, I like to call them the named versions: Seattle, Tokyo, Berlin, and Rio. I mean, we definitely capture the spirit of the old Delphi IDEs, stability, performance. I mean, these work great, and especially now with the dark theme. You know, working 8 hours. Well, no one works 8 hours. No developer works 8 hours. So working 12 hours in front of the IDE is much better. I think we get it right when it comes to performance and stability, and you know, the ease of use of the good old days of Delphi 7. In our market in Latin America, we have a lot of customers on Delphi 7, and the first thing that I show them on you know, when demoing Rio is how fast it opens, how great it looks, how and how stable it is. I mean, in my opinion, I use it every day, and I haven't seen you know, the issues that you could have seen in older versions. For example, you know, in mid versions. For example, the use of memory has been improved greatly. You know, the CPU usage, same thing. You know, in some of the mid versions there, we had some issues. You know, we have to admit that. But you know, named versions, stability, it's great. Even when it comes to the XE versions, you know, we see a lot of improvement. But the last 4 or 5 versions, I mean, aside from stability, we have speed. So I you know, I think we should be very proud on that.
You know, it's one of those things. I think there's a lot of nostalgia around Delphi 7, and like you said, there were some that weren't after Delphi 7 that were not as fast. But I find that when I had a project that I required me to go back to, I think Delphi 6, and I was like, oh yeah, this will be great because everybody's talking about how fast this is, and I'm like, I miss I can't remember what version of Delphi I was using at the time, but whatever it was, I was like, oh wow, this is not all I remember it to be.
I know. Yeah, you know, it's funny. It's funny you say that because we were helping out a customer that was precisely on Delphi 6, you know, and I was like, oh my God, this is gonna be great. It wasn't. I mean, believe me, it was where I couldn't find things, you know, and of course you have to run that on, you know, like an XP version or something like that. So even on the operating system, you know, trying to find things, trying to start things, things that were in there, like, you know, it's like, oh yeah, this can easily be solved with the REST debugger. Oh my God, there's no REST debugger. There's nothing. There's hardly anything there. I mean, there have been so many great features added over the years. You know, once I was working at Borland when Delphi 6 was the first project that I worked on when I was at Borland. And you're right, it might be nostalgia. It's great that you pointed it out, because yeah, it was you know, things were not as easy as they are now. We were doing some SOAP migration. That was the very first version, I think, where SOAP came out. Or it was Delphi 6 or Delphi 7. And yeah, you know, there was no wizard. You had to do everything manually. You know, even changes in the debugger and evaluator that you know, you're used to that now. You know, they were not there. So yeah, good point.
There's a question here. It says, what do you do with extended type conversion regarding Win64, meaning the required mantas on an extended type?
Of course. See, that is one of that is a big change, because the size of the type is actually smaller when it comes to extended. We used to have you know, 32-bit a type that was processed by the coprocessor. We gave that up for a faster in-processor data type. So we lost, I believe it's about 2 decimal places. But there are ways to continue to use that with records. There's a replacement record that is the extended AD rec, T extended AD rec, and that has 10 bytes on Windows 64. So we have a workaround. You can just Google T extended AD rec, and that will give you a very similar data type to what we used to have in Delphi. In Delphi for 32 bits. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I found Ray's components. It's called bonus KSVC. K is in Kanopka, S is in signature, V is in VCL, and C is in control.
Interesting.
And then radiant shapes. So I'll put the names of those in here, and they're available in Rio.
Great.
Just verified that. Profiling tools. What do you recommend out there for profiling tools?
Let me see. Well, for profiling tools, I don't know. What do you have any preferences on this one?
I'm trying to think. What I've used is AQ Time by SmartMirror. I think it's the one I've used the most. Usually, yeah, I think that's the only one I use Delphi specifically. There are other things you can do that I've done for manually for testing things, but generally AQ Time is the one
AQ Time, yeah. I was thinking about any other profiling tools, but yes, that's pretty much the de facto one, right?
Yeah, there are other ones that aren't Delphi specific that I've used, which you can use with Delphi. But as far as if you want to have one that integrates really nicely with Delphi, I think AQ Time is the one to go with. And I'm sure I'm probably forgetting some, and someone's probably going to point those out here in a second.
Right.
Alf saying NexusDB has profiling tools as well. That's true, actually. For database profiling, NexusDB and FireDAC both have profiling tools built into them for profiling database performance. On suggestion on migration, it's nice is now to start with unit testing or even simple procedures or functions. That's true. A lot of times, if I'm going to be doing a migration, I'll start with something simple, just kind of prove and say, okay, this is working. This is what I need to do, and then that way I know, right? So if you can take a small chunk of your project and migrate that,
of course,
give you an impression of how it's going to work overall. Alf suggested Fix Insight, fantastic tool for spotting bugs in your code. Adds a lot more warnings and hints. What is the size of a blob is recommended for a T-client dataset?
That Is there? I don't think there's any limitation on blobs. What is the size of a blob recommended for use in client dataset? Do you know if of any limitation, Jim?
You're gonna have, I don't know that there's any hard limitations, but you definitely would have performance issues and and physical memory limitations, although I mean they're swapping and stuff like that. So I would say, test it and see, but I don't think there's any specific hard limits that I'm aware of offhand.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you. I mean, you might have the addressing issue, so you would be limited to, in theory, to a 2 terabyte blob. But I don't think I would even think of going that far. So yeah, I would say it's a trial thing. You should definitely try on these. I mean, client datasets are really fast. Their in-memory processing is quite fast. But yeah, I would check.
I would imagine the actual limit is greater than what would be practical to do.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
The other day I read that it's not possible to compile programs with Rio for XP. Have you had any experience with this, Alex? Otherwise, I have some things I can add about this as well.
No. To be honest, that one of the characteristics of Delphi applications and Delphi in general is how long-lived our applications are. I mean, you can take an application compiled in Delphi 6 and run it in, hardware and an operating system like Windows 10 that came out, 18 years after Delphi 6 was released, and vice versa. And in fact, I don't know or I haven't run into any limitations. I know there are changes on the loading and stuff like that, but I haven't run into any. I don't know about you, Jim.
So Rio is, I think it was as of Tokyo, XP was no longer, no, it was Seattle maybe. Yeah, Seattle. As of Seattle,
supported.
XP was no longer officially supported. Now, what that means, and I know people that are still targeting XP, is that you can't take advantage of the new Windows 10 components on XP. So some of those components, if you run on XP, will downgrade gracefully and just not work. Some of them may just cause your program to fail. And so you need to test it on XP. So if you take a program you wrote in Delphi 7, migrate it to Rio, not adding any new Windows 10 functionality, it should work fine on XP, should being there.
Right.
If you say, hey, let's modernize this and add Windows 10 features, then you're probably not going to work anymore.
Yeah, then you're going to have issues. Yeah, a perfect example of this is the dialogues. Some of the newer, I think they were called the Vista dialogues. That's a perfect example of features that may not work, or that will actually not work. So, but again, talking about a migration, if you have a project created in Delphi 6 or 7, you bring it over to Rio, you compile it, and you port it back to an XP machine. I have not seen issues with that. Although I have done, this is the smaller sample that I have, because usually what people want to do is bring it to the latest compiler so they can run their applications on recent versions like Windows 7, 8, 8.1, and 10. But yes, I have done that in the past.
Yep. So Kevin's saying that sales told him that Raise was not available. It is available. It's just part of Get It. So not sure, I guess, let them know they're wrong. I'm not sure why they would say that. Question here about Raise Components High DPI support. I don't know about Raise Components High DPI specifically, but I do know we keep updating it and working towards better high DPI.
Right.
Tag components and Get It that require privileges. Interesting idea. Yeah, so Kevin, if you have Rio, check it out. You should be able to get a Raise. If you can't, let us know and I'll figure it out. But I see them there, and I just have Rio installed as well. I came from Born in C++ Builder 6. How about the Indie components? What were used there?
What was the version used in C++ Builder 6? I think it was version 9 of Indy or something like that. I don't have the exact version, but you know, I have found that in the components do port over gracefully. There are, you know, what I have found mostly is that they renamed or moved things around. So what I found is, for example, that you know, you bring over a project from Delphi 6, C++ Builder 6, and you try to compile. Things are not going to be in the same units as they used to be. So you need to. Usually, what I do here is I do a Control-Shift-F. I'm sorry. I try to find the type or the you know, the yeah, pretty much the type or function that you're trying to use, the component that you're trying to use, and you find where it is in the new source tree. So that way, you know, you add your units to units clause, and you'll be able to compile. I don't know. Do you have any comments on that, Jim?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Most of the time, it's just been moved around a little bit. Usually, I'm able to find it because I've had stuff I've moved as well. One trick I do, first of all, you want to have everything, which is a free program installed that lets you just search all the files on your computer really quickly.
Right.
And the other thing that you want to do is you want to add your source path to, so there's two things. Go into Windows indexing, and
Yep.
by default, it doesn't index your program files directory. So you can go in there and add your program files directory to Windows indexing and tell it to index.pass files as plain text. And what that'll let you do is you can then jump into your source folder and say, where did they move this component or this property or whatever to? Type it in, search it. It'll give you all the pass files that have that in it, and you can find it real quick, open it in IDE, and adjust the uses clause. And I find I get stuff done way quick with that.
Yeah, no, it's an instant search. Once it's indexed, Windows will return some these very, very fast. Hey, have you found any issues with, you know, when sometimes when I do that, for some reason your the indexing goes over to the Android SDK path, and it gets stuck in there. Have you seen this, Jim?
I've not seen that. If I always scope it down to
just pass files,
just the pass files, or just that folder I wanted in.
I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, so I don't include the Android SDK in the path, for example.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna try that. That definitely, because I used to do this and then I stopped because I don't know, the search would get stuck on the SDK, NDK. But I'm gonna try it again. I probably stopped doing that in around Seattle. So I'll make sure to try it.
So I just put a link in the chat window here, and I'll send it to you as well on a blog post I did on searching source code. This is from Tokyo, but you can easily adjust it to work with that. That's always, whenever I install the new version, I have to go in and remove the old version from the source search and add the new version in so I can find it. I guess I can leave both of them in there, but I have in the quick launch bar on the side of my Explorer window, I have a pinned directory for source, and I just click there, search it, boom, find what I'm looking for. It's so amazing. I love it so much. Question here about using Zeos or FireDAC. So one thing I will say, and then maybe Alex has something to add to this, FireDAC is awesome. So if you're not familiar with Kerry Jensen is, first of all, he just was awarded the Spirit of Delphi Award at Code Rage. Very exciting. Spirit of Delphi Award is where we recognize individuals who make a huge contribution to what it is to be a Delphi developer and the Delphi development experience. He's written over 25 books on software development, most of them related to databases. When we first came out with FireDAC, I went to Kerry and said, hey, if you talk about FireDAC more, that'd be great. And he's like, well, I'm not really familiar with it, so let me get familiar with it before because I don't want to say anything about it until I feel comfortable with it. And then later I was talking to him and he said that he was on a consulting assignment and so was having some performance issues. And he said, well, let's switch to the newest version of FireDAC and see how that fixes the problem. That was the only thing I did, is switch to the new version of FireDAC. and it fixed so many bugs and so many performance issues they're having. He was blown away. And so now he tells everybody, just upgrade to the latest version of FireDAC, and if that's not right, then figure it out. But usually that's the answer. He's also written a book on Delphi in-depth FireDAC. So FireDAC is great. Now, there are people that are going to say, oh, but AnyDAC does this, or Zeos does this, or NexusDB does that. That's great. I'm not saying all the other libraries aren't fantastic. They are, but FireDAC's in the box. So try FireDAC. If that works for you, great. If there's a specific feature you need another library to do, then do that. But generally speaking, FireDAC is going to get you there. And yes, FireDAC supports Oracle. You'll want to have, so the difference between enterprise and professional, or professional then enterprise and architect, is professional lets you use FireDAC to access local databases. Enterprise and architect lets you use FireDAC to access remote databases. So Oracle is a remote database. So if you're wanting to connect to a remote Oracle database, get enterprise. It's also going to give you a lot of other stuff besides the FireDAC remote database connectivity. But with enterprise, you can access Oracle. It does a fantastic job with it. I cut my teeth in database development on Oracle, so I'm a big fan of it. And FireDAC does a great job. I seriously could go on for hours about how much I love FireDAC. It is such an amazing framework.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And but by sticking to FireDAC, you're gonna get what is out of the box. You're gonna minimize dependencies on third-party components. Not that third-party components are bad. It's just that it's one more thing that you have to think when you're doing a migration. Orem is suggesting for the dependencies and code searches, code dependencies analyzing wizard. There's a free version for from Delphi parser, so this is a great recommendation, Orem. And Fabio asks about BDE to FireDAC migrations, and he says, are there any suggestions about migrating DB access to FireDAC? Yes, Fabio, you can also use Refind for this. Refind is regular expression based, so as long as you give it the right component changes, sets and any other things that you are going to migrate, you can do it. There's a sample for BDE, sample for, I believe it's DB Express. I don't remember if we have one for IBX to FireDAC, but just check your local folder and look for Refind, and we have several samples there. I was able to find one online for as far as migration script, and I think it was for DBGo to BDE. So you can look online to see if you can find any particular migration script around. So yeah,
there's a few things online here. I see a blog post by Marco, and there's a few other ones that you can check out for using Refind as well. That's BDE, DB Express. And then there's another question here about EMS. Says Rad Server. It says, does it support any other databases besides Interbase? So it uses Interbase internally for session and user management, but as far as building your application, it could be any database. You can use any database. You can use FireDAC components for, or any database you have access to through other components. I suppose you could build it with BDE if you really wanted to, although I wouldn't recommend it. But yeah, it's not. It only uses Interbase internally.
Right. Yeah. No. Definitely. That is a very question that we get often. Why can I only use Interbase? It's really not that. You can use anything. You could use, I don't know, you could go crazy and do SQLite or anything, local database for your own services. Interbase is just for its own functionality. So yeah, that's an important.
Yeah, you could use MongoDB or whatever, or no database. But then additionally, it does include that Interbase license. So it does include Interbase to go license for all the users and Interbase license for you on the back end, I believe. Talk to the sales; they know licensing better than I do. But
yeah, same here.
So you can take advantage of that, although you don't have to.
Exactly.
I don't see DB Express refined stuff online. I'm sure there is. I'm just not seeing it right now. I can't search as quickly or much as I'd like to while I'm also doing question and answer here.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, it's almost 12:30. So FYI, I mentioned the $5 Appel packet. I just bought a bunch of books, and including 2 pre-release ones. Double the benefit of the webinar today. Thanks. Oh, great.
Hey, the DBX migration script is included in our tools refined directory, dbx to fd migration.txt. So it is right there, guys.
Okay, great. So Interbase does not include, so you get a developer license for Interbase with professional, and I believe, Alex, do you know, with enterprise, you get a full Interbase license, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the things that differentiates enterprise and architect is that you get, I know that you get the RAD server licensing with enterprise and architect, different licensing there, whereas with Pro you only get the developer license. Then also, like I said, RAD server I believe includes Interbase license. So if that with that included Interbase license with RAD server, you would therefore have an Interbase license, I believe. Talk to sales to make sure that that's right, though.
Yeah, we have a post here by Hernan. He says that they migrated from FireDuck from FB Plus and had some issues. You know, when it comes to Interbase and related, like for example, Firebird, you have to be really careful and take a lot of care on transaction management. Remember, that is a multi-generational based database. So everything that you do on the against the database is going to start a transaction. So you have to keep an eye on your oldest active transaction all the time. Make sure that, for example, if you have read-only queries, that you put them in a transaction read-only. That is going to save you a lot of time and headaches. Make sure that whenever you do write something into the database, you can do it like in a two-phase commit where you do your try, finally, accept, rollback. But yeah, take very, very special care of your transactions. Otherwise, you're going to have hangups. You're going to stop the garbage collection on the oldest active transaction. You're going to have slowdowns the next time you start your application or the server starts. It's going to be quite slow. So many cases when I see these posts about a migration to FireDuck and issues on Firebird or even Interbase, they're related to this. Proper transaction management will give you an even faster performance compared to anything else.
So I did find a webinar here that David I did on using Refine to migrate DB Express applications to FireDuck.
Oh,
so
great.
I'll post that in the chat here as well.
Thank you.
And that is, it's 12:30. Well, 12:30 my time, 1:30 Central Time. I'm not sure if I'm everybody else, but we're way over time. So thank you everybody for sticking around so that we can answer your questions. Thank you, Alex, for putting this webinar together. Anything you want to add real quick before we close?
No, just to thank everyone. I hope the webinar was useful for you. Again, there's a lot of my personal experience on this and how I do things. This is software development, and software development is an art. So there are 1,000 ways to do this. Thank you, everyone.
That is so true. I'm putting a couple more links in here for DB Express. So if you're interested in that, I will try and leave the chat window up for you for a few minutes so you can grab those.
Excellent.
Yeah, we have a DocWiki article, DB Express application migration FireDuck. Cool. All right, great. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you around. Take care.
Take care, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Bye.